You're here, so you're curious. Today, we're plunging into some really fascinating research. We're exploring a pretty fundamental question. Does a society actually have to be unequal to survive long term?
Yeah, it's a big one. We're looking at work mainly from Professor Dan Lawrence at Durham University, and also a specific paper called Housing Inequality and Settlement Persistence are Associated Across the Archaeological Record.
Right, and what we're trying to figure out, really what you might be wondering is, well, does history show that inequality is sort of the price we pay for a society that lasts? For sustainability.
Or is there another story? Can societies be, both long-lasting and more equal? That's the core question these researchers tackled using just a staggering amount of archaeological data. And it definitely hits home with today's sustainability debates.
Absolutely. You hear it sometimes, don't you? That inequality is just natural, maybe even needed for things to keep going. But this research goes way back 10,000 years to really put that idea to the test.
And when they talk sustainability, they are using that familiar UN definition, meeting present needs without compromising the future.
Okay.
But for this study, they really zeroed in on two things. How long did a place actually stick around? Its persistence or continuity, and how evenly was the wealth spread out?
Wealth measured how, though? In ancient societies?
Yeah, good question. Their main method, and the scale is just wild.
Yeah.
We're talking 10 millennia, over 47,500 homes, almost 3,000 archaeological sites globally.
Wow.
Their main proxy for wealth inequality was looking at differences in house sizes. The assumption being, bigger house, probably wealthier occupants.
Okay, right. Simple enough concept. But how did they turn bigger house into a number for inequality?
They use something called the Gini coefficient. It's basically a scale 0 to 1.
Okay.
0 means perfect equality, all houses the same size. 1 means maximum inequality, like one huge mansion and tons of tiny huts. So they calculated this Gini score for house sizes at each site.
And compared that score to how long the settlement was actually occupied, its persistence.
Exactly that. They're hunting for a link. Did the more unequal places, the ones with higher Gini scores, tend to last longer? Or was it the other way around? It's really an ambitious way to get at these deep societal patterns.
So the moment of truth.
Yeah.
What did this enormous trawl through history actually find?
Well, the first pass, looking at everything together globally, showed a weak positive correlation.
Weak positive, meaning?
Meaning, on average, settlements with more inequality in house size showed a slight tendency to persist longer. But, and this is super important, they stress this constantly, it's a correlation.
Right, not causation. Doesn't mean inequality makes them last longer?
Precisely. Could be other factors entirely, but still an interesting initial pattern.
Okay, a weak link overall, but I suspect there's more to it. It usually gets complicated when you look closer, especially over 10,000 years.
You absolutely nailed it. This is where it gets really fascinating, that relationship between inequality and persistence. It became much clearer, much stronger when they factored in the scale and complexity of the societies.
Scale and complexity. How do they measure that?
They use metrics called NOV levels and which level. Think of NOV levels as how many tiers there are in a settlement system. Like, is it just isolated farms or villages trading with towns, which answer to a city? That's more level.
Like a hierarchy.
Exactly. And which level just tells you where a particular site sits in that hierarchy. Is it a small village lowdown or a big city at the top?
Got it. So not just looking at sites alone, but their place in the bigger picture. Makes sense. A village is different from a capital city.
Totally different. And what they found was striking. At the very bottom, the simplest, most isolated sites, the relationship was actually negative.
Negative. So more inequality was bad for lasting longer in small places.
Seems that way, yes. In those simpler contexts, big differences in house size might have actually been linked to shorter occupation spans, maybe instability.
Huh. Unexpected. But what about higher up the chain?
That's where it flipped. For basically all sites that were part of a system with more than one level, and for all sites above that lowest level, the correlation turned positive. And interestingly, it tended to get stronger the higher up the hierarchy you went.
So the more complex the society, the larger the settlements, the stronger the link between inequality and sticking around.
That's the trend they saw, yeah. They even combined variables into a social advantage score, SA, which showed a similar positive relationship overall, though with some interesting regional quirks we can get into.
Okay, so this definitely seems to support the idea that maybe in more complex societies, inequality and long-term survival are somehow linked. But why? What are the theories?
They floated a few key ideas. One revolves around something called functional diversity.
Functional diversity.
Yeah, the idea is that when you see more variety in house sizes, maybe it reflects more people doing different jobs, specializing.
Like craftsmen, farmers, administrators, different roles.
Exactly. Which connects to Adam Smith's old idea, Smithian growth. Specialization and trade can boost overall wealth.
But maybe not for everyone equally. Some skills become more valuable.
Precisely. So you get more overall productivity, potentially more resilience because you have different skills, but also potentially a more uneven distribution of the rewards.
So complexity breeds specialization, which might help the society overall adapt and survive, but also creates gaps in wealth.
That's a central part of their argument, yes. More diversity in roles might make the whole system more robust, better able to handle shocks like environmental change or whatever.
It's like a diverse ecosystem being more resilient than a monoculture.
Good analogy, yeah.
What else? Were there other factors?
Oh, definitely. Urbanization was another big one. The data showed larger settlements, the cities within these bigger systems, tended to last longer and be more unequal. And this brought in the concept of extractive capacity.
Extractive capacity. Sounds a bit ominous.
Well, it just means the ability of those bigger centers, the cities, to pull in resources, food, materials, labor from the surrounding smaller places, the rural hinterland.
Wow. Through taxes. Trade.
Could be both. Political means like taxes or tribute, or economic means like being the main market, providing services people need, creating demand.
So the cities thrive and last longer, partly by drawing resources from the countryside, which could increase inequality between the city and the villages.
That's the dynamic they're suggesting, yeah. It could boost the persistence of the center, but maybe at the cost of wider inequality across the whole system.
You mentioned regional differences earlier. Where did things look different?
Right. They did see quite a bit of variation. North America, for instance, actually showed a strong negative correlation with that social advantage score.
Negative again. Why?
Their thinking is that compared to other regions in the sample, North America historically had fewer of those really large, dominant, long-lasting urban centers pulling everything together. The structure was different.
Interesting. Any other regional points?
Well, they noted their model seemed to explain things better statistically in the Americas compared to Asia and Europe, which kind of opens up more questions, really. Needs more investigation.
Were there exceptions to the rule, like major cities that lasted ages but weren't super unequal in terms of housing?
Yes. And this is crucial. They specifically point out outliers, big, important, long-lived places like Monte Alban or Teotihuacan in Mexico.
Oh yeah, huge sites.
Or even Athens, Mohenjo-Daro in the Indus Valley. These places were major players, persisted for a long time, but their house size Gini coefficients were relatively low.
So more equal housing, but still successful and long-lasting.
Exactly. It shows the link isn't absolute. It suggests that societies can achieve longevity without massive material inequality, or that maybe institutions can, quote, mute that link.
That's actually really important. It means there isn't just one path. Inequality isn't necessarily destiny for complex societies.
Precisely. And they also found, looking site by site, that just because a place lasted longer didn't automatically make it more unequal over time. And high inequality at one point didn't reliably predict it would soon be abandoned.
So, again, breaking that direct causal chain.
Yeah. They lean towards the idea that persistence and inequality are probably both influenced by deeper shared factors like that scale and complexity, rather than one directly causing the other.
Okay, so let's bring this home. For someone listening now, thinking about today's massive wealth gaps, climate change, sustainability, what's the big takeaway from digging through all this ancient dust?
I think the really hopeful message, honestly, is that this deep history suggests building complex, lasting societies doesn't have to mean ever-increasing inequality. Yes, there's often a correlation, especially as things got bigger and more hierarchical, but it's not ironclad. Those outliers, those more equitable cities that lasted, they matter. The lack of clear cause and effect matters.
So it suggests we might have choices.
Exactly. The researchers themselves think these findings could help inform how we tackle things now. It implies we could, potentially, work on reducing inequality and boosting long-term sustainability at the same time. They aren't necessarily trade-offs.
Didn't they also talk about a limitation? Something like a snapshot problem? Dealing with archaeological data?
Ah, yes, good point. It's
Yeah.
about the nature of the evidence. You often only have house-size data from one specific period in a settlement's long history. It's just the snapshot in time.
And inequality might have gone up and down over centuries within that one place.
It certainly could have. They tried to check this, though. They looked to see if the inequality level in their snapshot predicted how long the site lasted before or after that point, and they didn't find a strong link, which again suggests that the level of inequality at one moment isn't necessarily the key factor determining its ultimate fate, at least not on its own.
And the scale thing you mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
that seems really key too. Looking at just one site versus the whole region.
Absolutely critical. They really stress this. What you see happening at one dig site might not tell you the whole story about the larger system it's part of, especially as those systems get bigger and more interconnected.
So you need to analyze this stuff at different levels, local, regional.
Yes, multiple social and spatial scales to really get the full picture of how inequality and persistence interact or don't interact.
Okay, so boiling it down then, for you listening.
Mhm.
This deep dive across millennia shows, often a link between inequality and settlements lasting longer, especially the complex ones.
But it's probably not a simple cause and effect. It seems more tied to those underlying factors of scale, complexity, maybe specialization.
And crucially, it's not inevitable. History shows us examples of societies that were both long-lasting and relatively equitable, at least in housing terms.
That's the key takeaway. The past gives lessons, but it doesn't lock us into one future. Those outliers are proof that different paths are possible.
So, a final thought to leave you with. Thinking about our world now, so complex, facing these huge challenges of inequality and sustainability, what do these echoes from the past suggest? Is the inequality we see today truly a necessary price for keeping things going? Or could we actually aim for something different, a future that's both resilient and more fair?
Definitely food for thought. Archaeology giving us perspective on today's biggest questions.
It certainly is. Thanks for digging in with us on this deep dive.